Number 10. History. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC. Queen Nefertiti, aka the Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BCE. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes, and she was only 15 years old when she married the 16-year-old Akhenaten. She worshipped the sun god Aten, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital city called Amarna, and she also created a new religion, so how's that? She ruled over what's considered the wealthiest period in Egypt history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters, which may have had something to do with why we don't know much about her today, but I'll get into that much later on. Number 9. Her death. After changing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished, just like that. And on this video, we're gonna try and figure out what may have happened to her. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's legacy. She was gone from everything. Many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather she disguised herself and continued to rule. The next in line after Akhenaten's reign was the pharaoh Smenkhare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That would be pretty sweet if we proved that and figured that out. I'm really rooting for that. The reason we believe that she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, because they ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century. It's known that they had a big traditional fake beard. It's cool. It's like kind of flashy. I kind of want one. I can't grow a beard or a mustache, so I kind of want a fake one myself. Lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. We've gotten closer to uncovering the truth though recently in 2015, when Nicholas Reeves and Mamdouh El-Damadi found what they think is a hidden doorway in King Tut's tomb that contains perhaps the sarcophagus of the lost queen. I'll get into that shortly, but first we need to talk about her modern day origins. Number 8. Berlin bust. Perhaps one of the most popular ancient sculptures of all time was found on December 6, 1913. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found this on the floor of the Royal Sculptures Workshop. This figure has some unforgettable details. I mean, first of all, she's breathtaking to look at, and the blue headpiece. These are all important. It was clear that this was Queen Nefertiti from the start. The German team split everything with the Egyptian government, so currently this bust is being held in Berlin. It draws in about 50,000 visitors a year to Berlin's Neues Museum, a little piece of Egypt all the way over there. We love it. Now, a fun little fact about this modern bust, in 2009 there were scans done to it, technology, nice, and it's revealed that underneath this painted layer is limestone carving of a woman so detailed that you can see wrinkles in her cheeks, even a bump on her nose as well. That's like 4K Egypt, it's crazy. Back in 2016, these two artists secretly 3D scanned the bust of the lost queen and then straight up released the files online as a free download. The future is here, I guess. Also, that's a little invasive. Just scanning your head, like that's really? But 3 years later, officials decided to release that to the public, so here it is, take a look. The Queen Nefertiti 3D bust, scanned by James Bond secretly. Number 7, Monuments Men. It wasn't always a smooth ride for this specific bust. Sometimes it was a bust. I had to, why not? She spent 11 years in the private residence of Germany's expedition founder, Jacques Simon. Cut to 9 years later, that's when King Tut's tomb was discovered, a totally separate event, unbeknownst to them, connected. Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb in 1922, and of course afterwards, the entire world was watching. Just a year later, her bust was finally moved to Berlin. It had a rocky go. It remained in Germans' hands throughout the entire war. Even that big ugly dude with the little mustache said that he himself would never relinquish the head of the queen. So thanks, Spittler. I can't say his name because YouTube. It was hidden in a salt mine throughout the entire Cold War. The Germans would arrive too late though sometimes when stealing rich pieces of art. Like in 1940, for example, they arrived at the Louvre and it was bare. The Mona Lisa was now in a child's bedroom. Curators had moved the pieces, thankfully. But when a bust of a long-lost queen of Egypt was being held in a salt mine in the town of Merkers, the Monuments Men literally saved history. When Sergeant Kenneth C. Lindsay led his team down the 35 miles of tunnel, and aside from the queen's bust, billions of dollars of gold was also found down there, all stolen from the Germans. Number 6. Hidden chamber. Ancient Egyptian architecture is mind-blowing. Even to this day, we're trying to figure out how exactly everything was built. More and more secrets are coming out of all these hidden tombs. It's fascinating. Technology is for sure a helping hand when it comes to learning about our past queens and kings. And for Queen Nefertiti, her final resting place is now believed to be in a secret chamber in King Tut's tomb. This was years ago. Egypt tourist minister Hisham Zazou said the discovery was like a big bang. And I see no lies. It's perhaps one of the biggest discoveries of the 21st century. After After radar tests were conducted, Egyptian officials were 90% sure they found a hidden chamber. And it was also full of treasures, so that's neat. And also, we're onto something. Number 5. Original plans. Another theory that surrounds the queen is that King Tut's chamber was actually meant for her. Yeah, listen to this. The former Antiquities Minister doesn't believe this. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. What's compelling here though is that King Tut passed away at age 19, so many believe his own burial chamber hadn't even been built yet, or finished at least. So instead, they used hers. But a radar survey around the tomb in the Valley of the Kings shows us this hidden chamber behind the north wall of the burial chamber. It's been said before that King Tut's chamber was way too small and there must be more. His stepmom being buried in the same tomb, well, that's certainly a start. We're onto something. Number 4. Tomb alignment. Nobody knows angles like ancient Egyptians. The way they built the pyramids, I mean, they still stand today confidently. We're trying to figure out just how they made the pyramids in the first place. Meanwhile, there's a team inside the pyramids trying to figure out who is even buried in the walls. It's a whole fascinating mystery. Using ground-penetrating radar, researchers were able to find this corridor, this log opening in the bedrock at the exact same depth of King Tut's chamber. And on top of that, these openings are facing the same direction. Tomb KV62 and this new chamber have the same orientation, so of course we're going to believe that they're connected. Because unconnected tombs don't often align, or don't ever align really, so that's also a sign. We're getting close. Let's just give me a shovel, I'll get in there, I'll help out. Be so gentle with everything. I'll feather things off. I've seen National Treasure. Number 3. Brief ruling. The queen was the stepmother of King Tut. Her daughter was married to King Tut, so there's a handful of Egyptologists that believe that right before King Tut's ruling in the 14th century, there was this really small window where Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh. There's also a great deal of historians that believe Nefertiti was no ruler to her husband, King Akhenaten, but we don't have enough evidence quite yet to really know what happened. Hence why we're doing a mystery video on the long lost queen. Now we get it. The reason we're adamant on finding everything we can is because she literally changed Egyptian religion. Number 2. Her family. The queen's name translates to a beautiful woman has come, and given the fact that we still don't know her parentage, we have to use our national treasure brains here. A beautiful woman has come. Come from where? Well, early Egyptologists believed that Queen Nefertiti came from Syria. Back then, it was Mitanni. Her family roots are still debatable, but there's reason to believe that Nefertiti was actually Egyptian born. In fact, many believe she's related to King Akhenaten. We don't really know. The lost queen did have children of her own. She had 6 daughters, like I mentioned before, 2 of which became queens of Egypt. She may have also been the daughter of A, who at the time was an advisor for the king and ended up becoming pharaoh after King Tut's death in 1323. So we have no idea, but we're getting so close. I feel like we're like years away from finding everything we need to know, but also this last point is pretty interesting. Number 1, sun god origins. Okay, one of the most interesting facts about all of this was the religious impact that the queen made on ancient Egypt. Both her and King Akhenaten were in a cult. How fascinating is that? They were in the cult of the sun god Aton. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time. There have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, so definitely her, part of these sun god rituals. So, cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aton was now Egypt's main god. She made a new god. She convinced everyone to believe in a new god. That's incredible. We can't even decide on who's gonna win America's Got Talent. She's like trading in traditions and religions. That's wild.
At number 10, kleptomania. If you were a queen, then you would think that you had enough money to just buy whatever your little heart desired. Though that may be true, there was at least one famous queen who just straight up stole things just because she could. Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth's grandmother, was quite the kleptomaniac, and no matter how hard people tried to avoid having their things stolen by her, it just never worked. When the queen would visit someone's house, she would walk around looking at whatever knickknacks you had lying around, and when she found something that she liked, she would stand there and just sigh super loudly to get someone's attention. Much like how my dog used to sigh dramatically when he wanted food. Anyways, usually when someone heard the sigh, they knew that this was a sign that the queen wanted whatever she was gazing upon. Sometimes the homeowner would just give whatever it was to the queen as a gift. But if it was something that they weren't willing to part with, then she would either try to buy it off them or just straight up take it when no one was looking. This became such a big problem that people started hiding their prized possessions before hosting the queen in their home, but she eventually caught on to this strategy, so she just started showing up uninvited. She could not rest until she owned pretty much everything in the kingdom.
Number 9, no time to dine. If I'm eating, don't acknowledge me as a human being. I sound like a pug when I eat, okay? I don't waste any time. I love food, okay? It's business. Now, if you're a queen and you eat fast, well, everybody else has to eat fast as well. This began back in Queen Victoria's time. The queen loved to feast and she didn't waste any time at all. Like, it's really fast. The way the royal family works is that when the queen is done that course or that meal, you're also done. So when Queen Victoria would smash an entire 7-course meal in 30 minutes, which apparently she could do easily, you'd be blowing on your soup still and Queen Victoria would already be telling everybody to pack it up. That's stressful. All because she could eat lots of food in a short amount of time. Also, once the queen gave a toast, you couldn't even speak. Also, once the queen placed her cutlery on the table, regardless of where you were during that course, everybody's plate would then be taken away at the same time. And the next one would then come in. I would just put my food in my pockets, you know, screw it. It's almost like when you go to all-you-can-eat sushi and you have like some sushi left over, you don't want to waste it. You're like, you know what? I'm not paying that bill.
At number 8, cross-dressing. Empress Elizabeth was quite the character, I guess you could say. Since she was a monarch, she could do whatever she wanted, and that is exactly what she did. You see, she was quite into fashion, more specifically men's fashion. The Empress believed that she just had legs for days, like Naomi Campbell, and she wanted to show them off to the world, but the only problem with that was the fact that back then, pants were reserved for men, and so since she wore dresses all the time, no one got to see her godly legs. Well, to combat that, Elizabeth came up with a solution. She was known to hold huge parties where everyone had to cross-dress. She only did this so that it would give her an excuse to wear pants. And I mean, she could have if she just wanted to wear them on a regular day, but she didn't want to be the only woman in men's clothing, so she made everyone else dress up too. At these parties, no one looked good or really enjoyed themselves for that matter. Women complained that the men's clothing they wore to these parties were unflattering, and the men were just all over the place because they didn't know how to maneuver a hoop skirt. The only person really having a fun time was Empress Elizabeth, but I guess that was really the whole point.
Number 7, check on the dead. Funerals are pretty expensive, especially a royal one at that. It takes a lot of power to dig up and then carry these massive caskets around, which back in the day was even more exhausting. Joanna of Castile was born in 1479. Her marriage to the Duke of Austria was arranged, but she was very much in love, maybe a bit too much. Hear me out. When her husband met his fate in 1506 due to typhoid fever, Joanna would have his tomb unearthed and then opened over and over again, just so she can make sure that he was still there. Now, of course, I feel bad for the queen here. She was clearly not coping with his death well, but to have his tomb or casket or coffin, whatever you want to call it, to have it opened and closed over and over and then dug up and then put back in the ground, she would make people carry his body around everywhere she went. That's heavy. That is so much work, even keeping it under her bed sometimes. Ugh, I got goosebumps just saying that. That's pretty creepy. Ashes, I could understand. That's like a one-man job to carry that around. But a 1,000-pound royal coffin that you have to carry 30 city blocks? My back already hurts thinking of that. No thank you. I quit.
At number 6, deadly affairs. Dating is hard. If you've ever been on dating apps like Tinder or Bumble, then you know that things aren't as easy as it may seem when it comes to finding someone that you remotely like. Maybe we should take a page out of Queen Nzinga's book when it comes to dating, because it seemed like she had fun with her escapades. Well, maybe don't actually do what she did because it's actually pretty gruesome, but you get what I'm saying. Queen Nzinga from what is now modern-day Angola was a busy woman. After taking over the throne from her brother, she juggled the monarchy, wars with the Portuguese, and having a love life. The queen pulled together a harem of only the most attractive men, but because she was such a busy person, she didn't really have the time to walk into a room and choose who she was going to sleep with that night, so she came up with an alternative solution. Nzinga would have 2 members of her harem fight each other to the death every night, and whoever won got to sleep with the queen. Solid plan, right? Well, the winner wasn't really all that lucky for too long, because she would have the winner executed the following day.
Number 5, diamond scandals. Queen Mary wasn't the only queen with sticky fingers, it seems. The affair of the diamond necklace has sparked many conversations. France's queen from 1774 to 1792 was Marie Antoinette, and if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because she was the last queen before the French Revolution. She was also known for spending $1 on jewelry. She liked She liked the diamonds. Now this Countess de la Motte was this young lady, a friend of the queen supposedly, who entered the French court in 1785. Now she got somebody to disguise herself as the queen, and then she acted like she was in love with this high society member, all to get her hands on this $12 million necklace. Now she said that she would pay, but never ended up paying a dime, so that's horrible by itself. And the queen supposedly had no idea about any of this or what happened to the necklace. Although this countess pretended to be her friend beforehand. The public went on to hate her for this, not believing in the scandal, of course. One of the most notable lines from Marie Antoinette was when the French spoke out for not being able to afford bread. She apparently said, "Well, let them eat cake," which led into the French Revolution and ultimately her demise. Shine bright like a diamond, I guess.
At number 4, test drives. Catherine the Great of Russia was well known for a number of things. She was known for being a good leader, a strong ruler, and surprisingly for her naughty bedroom fun times as well. She was well known for her adventures in baby making, and there was once a rumor that she did the deed with a horse. Obviously that wasn't actually true, however she did do it with a lot of men. The only problem that she really faced when it came to finding a new partner was actually having the time to do so. I mean, it's not like she could swipe through Tinder while sitting on her throne, right? What was most important to her was finding a new lover who was skilled in the sack, and she didn't really want to waste time on testing these guys out, so she had someone else do it for her. Catherine had a friend take her potential partner out on a test drive, so to speak, so that she wasn't wasting her time on someone who couldn't meet her standards. Remember, she is a very busy woman. It is said that on a couple of occasions, Catherine's tester friend was caught in bed with Catherine's partner again well after the Empress was with him, and that made things a little complicated, but I imagine that they got past that. Or at least I really hope they did.
Number 3, change religion. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaton from 1353 to 1336, Queen Nefertiti, aka Lady of Grace, aka the Lost Queen of Egypt, was only 15 years old when she married 16-year-old Akhenaton. Now, alongside her new young husband, she built an entirely new capital city called Amarna and ruled over what's now considered the wealthiest period in ancient Egyptian history. But when it comes to spoiled queens, or rather queens who could do anything they believe with their power, we have to mention the queen that changed Egypt's religion. Both her and her co-ruler were in a cult, the cult of the sun god Aten. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time, and there have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, part of these sun god rituals. So now cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aten was now Egypt's main god. Some queens change laws, others change religion.
At number 2, fake village. Imagine being so privileged and so disconnected from the world that you pretend to be poor for fun. Well, that's pretty much what Marie Antoinette did. This French queen was known for her lavish and opulent lifestyle, and that's really the only life that she knew. Apparently, living the life of a rich queen started to get a little boring for her, and she wanted to find an escape, and so she got her people to build a fake village for her so that she could pretend to be a commoner. This fake village included 11 cottages, a lake, a water mill, a working dairy, a windmill, a barn, and other quote-unquote peasant buildings. Marie apparently loved this little peasant village, and she would bring other people to enjoy it too. When she brought her guests to the village, she expected them to yes-and their way through the day and really immerse themselves into their role of a common person. She would even tell her ladies to ditch the ball gowns and wear something simple to blend in. Marie even took her kids to the fake village to teach them about farming. Even though she loved her pretend peasant lifestyle, it still didn't help her bond with the real common people, and it certainly didn't save her from the guillotine.
And finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, surprise entrance. The last true pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, ruled from 69 to 30 BC. She's known mainly for her love interests, of course, her two mans, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. And to this day, we're still trying to uncover more dazzling details of the lost queen. Now, she ruled alongside her young brother, and her life was much more than being just beautiful, which is what everyone seems to focus on more than anything. Both children were assigned to the throne, Cleopatra being 18 and little bro being 10 years old. So Cleopatra, being a little older, therefore a little wiser, became the ruler. A couple of years passed, and eventually Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria over her greed for power, classic, but her little brother, equally a co-ruler, had her driven out. He was jealous, and honestly, I'm the youngest in my family, I kinda get it. But Cleopatra wasn't quite done yet. She had a few tricks up her sleeve. Believing she was the goddess Isis, reborn, this beautiful goddess, Cleopatra made these dazzling entrances whenever she could, most notably in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria during that family feud with Ptolemy VIII. She wanted to meet the Roman general, but she couldn't be seen because there was a little bit of family beef, so she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack and then personally delivered to Caesar's bedroom. Hashtag your order has arrived. Surprise. Now she won the heart of Rome's future dictator here, obviously, and eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, and in the following battle, he drowned in the Nile River, resulting in Cleopatra's return to power. Kicking off the list at number 10, Heart of Glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the royal who believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. I'm not joking, yeah, she was a princess, so not technically a queen, but this is so insane that I had to kick off this list with it. The 23-year-old Bavarian princess was quite the scholar. She was known to enjoy literature, but she equally put energy into convincing those around her that she'd swallowed a piano made entirely of glass when she was a wee child. She grew up afraid that her inner piano would shatter. We have an inner demon, she has an inner piano made of glass. So she would enter rooms slowly and sideways, I'm not kidding, to, you know, avoid cracking that personal piano problem. Just like King Charles VI, he thought he was going to break at any given moment. Saying you were made of glass was quite an uncommon delusion. The victims were more often than not royalty. They had glass, they watched this fancy material shatter in their hands all the time. No wonder, it probably scared them. There's actually a play on this glass delusion. It's called The Glass Piano by Alex Sobler. Quite recent too, apparently it's a blast. Check it out if you have the chance. We love that. Keep writing plays about glass pianos. This is insane.
At number 9, Rosemary's Baby. Back in the days of old, it was very important to the monarchy to have a male heir. Many kings throughout history have been known to get very upset when they weren't given a son to inherit the throne, and they put a lot of pressure on their wives to give them a boy. Why? I don't know. Boys kinda stuck. Anyway, this probably drove a lot of people crazy, but there's at least one confirmed case of crazy baby fever from Maria Eleonora. She kept trying to have a baby, but when she finally got pregnant, everyone was hoping for a boy. Unfortunately, the odds weren't in her favor, and she gave birth to a little girl instead. People knew that Maria would get absolutely triggered upon learning of her baby's gender, so they kept it a secret from her as long as they could, but eventually they had to tell her, and Maria was pissed. She really went looking for that receipt to return that baby and get a refund or at least a store credit. When she found out the baby was a girl, the queen reacted by saying, quote, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me, I will not have such a monster." End quote. Like damn, tell her how you really feel. After that, mysterious things started happening to this baby, like a wooden beam mysteriously falling into the baby's crib and somehow accidentally falling down the stairs. Even the nurse once dropped the poor kid onto the stone floor. Like, I get it. You're disappointed, but that's still your kid, and a lot of people aren't given that privilege, so be grateful for your spawn.
Number 8, dirty talk. Going back to the 15th century to Queen Isabella of Spain, now it's not uncommon for queens to brag, be it about their wealth, status, their mans, you name it. But to brag that you've only bathed twice in your life, that's a bit odd. What's the deal with this? Okay, well back in 537 AD, Rome had 11 aqueducts that ran over about 1,000 public fountains, okay? Over 900 bathhouses included. It was quite important, but when invading Goths cut them off, the Catholic Church literally had no idea how to fix the problem. So instead, they just told everybody that bathing was a sin only practiced by pagans. So at one point in history, you could have ran a bath, thrown in a bath bomb, relaxed for an hour, got out, and then immediately you're a sinner. Worst of the worst too, how dare you? Having a bath on Monday afternoon, you monster, you pagan monster. The Old Spice guy would have rocked their world.
At number 7, Mother Knows Best. I think after hearing about these queens who've done some dark things to get their way, you would think that it's safe to say you don't mess with a woman and her plight for power. Unless you want to end up 6 feet under, that is. One Roman empress, Julia Agrippina of Rome, was pretty spoiled already. She lived a lavish life, her husband was the emperor, and she had a family. But that just wasn't enough for her, and she wanted it all all. Julia was quite ambitious and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, and so she bamboozled her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing Roman law so that they could get married. Ew. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died, and most people think that Julia had something to do with it. That's likely the case. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had her forced out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world that she desired most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow her son, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. Talk about ambition getting the best of you.
Number 6. We Are Family. The last queen of Madagascar. Queen Rana Valona was one of the worst. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years. She was so cruel and violent that she would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she just went mad with that new power. In the late 1700s, her king brought peace to the land, but of course there were traditionalists who opposed him. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king. That king repaid the local by adopting his daughter, Rana Valona, to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now, when her prince was alive, they didn't get along at all. And then come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranilova the promotion of a lifetime. It's also theorized that she poisoned him too, so that's horrible. Ranilova kept away the advances of the French and the British and left bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. Lovely, like bobbleheads. In 1845, Queen Rana Valona ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months straight for this massive buffalo hunt. Well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and also not one buffalo was hunted, nor seen. Great plan.
At number 5, Queen Batman. Batman. He is justice. We know this. Well, long before Batman, there was a queen who sought vengeance, and she did it in the most brutal way. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed because her son was just too young to rule yet. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she had to do the most that she could with her power while it still lasted, and so she used her powers as monarch to seek justice for her husband's death. She was able to get her husband's killers captured and killed using scalding water, but she soon developed a thirst for suffering apparently, and she just kept on going after people. She would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. So if you ever breathed in the general vicinity of the guy who offed her hubby, you could kiss your life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that her killers were from. She devised a plan to bury their tribe's leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we know is that she definitely was not okay.
Number 4, no crust. This next one, honestly, I stand by. I see no wrong here. Queen Elizabeth II, still rocking to this day. She's been known for a few funny, quirky queen things. Like one of my favorites, for example, she has somebody on payroll who breaks in new shoes for the queen. Every time I buy Vans, my ankle always does that little foot rub. If only I were a queen, damn it. But we're talking about unusual things here, and one of the weirdest things I've ever heard is that the queen has refused crust on her sandwiches. This has been a no-go for about 150 years. It's not recent at all. You might be thinking, oh, maybe she's old, she can't chew her jawbones. Nope. Way back. This goes way back for no reason. Right around the time of Queen Victoria and her husband Albert. They viewed anything square-shaped as bad luck because it looked like a coffin. I've never thought about death while eating grilled cheese, but now I definitely will. Thank you. This must be a pretty scary job, cutting the crust off the queen's bread. My hands would be shaking the entire time. Also, diagonal or down the middle? Let us know. There's only one right answer.
At number 3, Evil Empress. This next empress is pretty similar to Olga of Kiev, whom I talked about earlier. Empress Wu Zetian also had a thirst for blood and suffering, but not towards people who have necessarily wronged her. You see, when she came into power, she was determined to keep that power by any means necessary, so she had all of her rivals killed. So anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The empress ordered the execution of the previous empress, as well as members of her own family, including her own own newborn daughter. She didn't want to risk anyone taking away her power, including her own offspring apparently. She didn't hold back on the methods of eliminating her rivals either. Yeah, sure, she could have just done a 1-2 stabby stabby and called it a day, but that's no fun. Instead, she had people poisoned, strangled, mutilated, or even burned or boiled alive. Good soup. Eventually, she retired from her part-time job of sending people back to their maker and started spending more time with her lovers and getting addicted to aphrodisiacs. People weren't quick to forget about all that bloodshed though, and so to get back at her, they had all of her lovers killed and the Empress was exiled. She got a little too greedy and karma came back with a vengeance.
Number 2, Ice Palace. If you're a fan of the film Frozen, this next one is gonna get you jazzed right up. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. Okay, so in celebration over their victory with the Ottoman Empire, Anna gave the order to build an ice house, this massive ice palace. Best place to cool down if you ask me. I'll leave. This ice palace was pretty impressive. If I was there, I would 100% lick the walls. Obviously, someone definitely did, you know that for a fact. 20 meters by 50 meters, and even more impressive, there were ice trees and ice birds sculpted inside. How magical is that? Anna arranged this marriage with a prince and one of her maids. Now they didn't know each other, they were forced to ride an elephant, and all the guests were dressed up like clowns. Yep, that's all valid, that's all accurate. You heard me. You may be thinking, wait a minute Taylor, an ice palace in Russia, was that maybe cold? Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. Anna made the guests party all night, freezing cold, they all got sick, dressed like clowns. I went to an ice hotel in Quebec once, spoiler alert, it's cold and boring. There, I just saved you $70. You're welcome.
And finally at number 1, Gladiator Games and Chill. If you didn't ever have to go to work and you could just lounge around all day, what would you do with your time? Really, anything could be possible. You could be like the Bruno Mars Lazy song. Well, there's one empress from back in ancient Rome who occupied her time with the company of others. Apparently, Empress Valeria Messalina was famous for her exploits. Since she was empress and she had all this time and money and no one to tell her no, she took full advantage of that and bought a house, turned it into a brothel, and made that her side hustle. A lot like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Though she had a collection of women who worked there, she also was known to invite upper class ladies to participate in the nightly escapades as well. And don't think that Valeria did jump in as well. She was considered to be quite something in the sack. In the wise words of Ludacris and Little John, she was a lady in the streets but a freak in the bed. The Empress was known to be such a hardcore participant that she would win games where they would compete to sleep with the most men in one night. One time she won the round after being with 25 men. One night. She did the absolute most, but at least she was having fun. At number 10, Blinded by Ambition. I don't know about you, but I think my favorite part of these queens lists is learning about all the wild and crazy things that queens did to keep or acquire power back in the days of old. Like, these gals were absolutely ruthless, and they weren't afraid to absolutely body anyone who stood in their way. We've heard about queens taking out enemy tribes, their husbands, and even their own family members. This all sounds like a round of Call of Duty when you're the last one on your team and you're just murking everyone in sight trying to save your own skin. Let's talk about a queen, or rather empress, who was so desperate for power that she ended up killing her own son. Irene of Athens was an empress from the Byzantine Empire who ruled from 797 to 802 CE. She started her reign as co-ruler alongside her son Emperor Constantine IV. Though it started as a good old family business, you know, saving people, hunting things. Not really. Things went south as they normally did back then. Irene wanted all the power to herself, and so she sought out to eliminate her competition, her own son. Irene lured her son into the very room that he was born in and gouged his eyes out. Like, ma'am, this is not ice cream. You can't just scoop eyeballs out and make a sundae out of them. Thank you. That's not how that works. Constantine ended up dying as a result of his injuries, and since his own heir had passed away earlier that year, the transition of power ended up going to Irene, who became emperor. Yes, emperor, not empress, because she was the sole ruler, making her the first woman to do so.
Number 9, topless duels. Yeah, you heard me. Hungarian Princess Pauline von Metternich was married to Prince Clemens, but she was born in 1836 and she had to marry her uncle when she was 20 years old. So, surprise, surprise, she was unhappy. Who knew? Weird, right? Since the marriage began, her husband was involved in numerous affairs. He liked going after actresses or singers, anyone glamorous or hot or cool. He barely paid any attention to her. That is until, you know, she started to have fun, live a life maybe. Yeah, once she got over this gross prince, she had a great time. She drank, she smoked, she partied, she defied convention, but most notably, her duel in the summer of 1892. She challenged another royal, a countess of the matter, to a duel in nothing but a corset. Now to this day, it's not yet determined who exactly won this duel, this corset poke off, but a princess dueling in the dark after some drinks, that should be a musical, not Frozen. Get out of here.
At number 8, no side bays. A bad relationship can really mess you up. Anyone who's been through a bad breakup can tell you that. Not as many people carry that pain with them as much as Catherine de Medici did back in the day. Her didn't even begin to describe how she felt, and she really embodied the pain that she was feeling after having her heart broken. She basically turned into the type of person that was like, if I'm not happy, no one else is gonna be happy either. Catherine's husband, Henry II of France, had a mistress, and Catherine was well aware of it. They had been having an affair for basically the whole time Catherine was married to Henry, and he loved his mistress more than he ever loved his wife. When Henry was on his deathbed, his final request was to see his mistress one last time, and as a final FU to her husband, not only did she deny the mistress from visiting Henry, but she literally made him die alone with no one by his side when he kicked the bucket. On top of this hatred towards her husband though, Catherine was also an absolute B-word to her daughter as well. Catherine would fight her daughter over her romantic affairs. I guess she didn't want her daughter to be like her father. Either way, Catherine got so mad about one of her daughter's affairs that when she found out about her lover, she locked her daughter away in a castle and never saw her again. Talk about a serious grudge.
Number 7. 2 for 1. When you're deemed the most beautiful woman in all the realm of England and the most loving, well, odds are you're going to need 2 husbands. All that love to give, it only makes sense. Joan of Kent was named as such, and at the age 12, so gross, she was married for the first time. She fell in love with a knight named Thomas Holland. Yeah, she dated Tom Holland, the knight Spider-Man guy. That's great. He was 26 and she was 12, still gross, but they got married in secret. She knew her parents wouldn't be on board. He was broke, and yeah, he was also 26, so for obvious reasons it had to be a little hush-hush. Even in royal standard, that's a bit odd. After the wedding, Thomas had to go off to war, and he wasn't gone for too long before, well, she remarried. The son of the Earl of Salisbury slid into her DMs, and Joan thought Tom Holland's Spider-Knight was dead. Well, Thomas returned, like he did in Endgame, but there were legal issues now. Ultimately, Joan and Thomas got together and had 4 children, but after Thomas did die, Joan became the first ever Princess of Wales. So if you love someone, just, you know, marry them. Even if the other person's still just over there, just marry them both, see what happens.
At number 6, apple of his eye. I feel like this queen I'm about to tell you about needs to have her own movie made about her or something, because the things she did for power were almost unbelievable. I would say that I would want to be her when I grow up, but she's kind of responsible for the deaths of a lot of people, and that's not really something I'm striving for, you know? But she did have a lot of determination. I will give her that. Isabella was married to King Edward II of England, and though she was quite the catch, Isabella wasn't really all that jazzed about him. She was like, meh, I guess I'll be your wife, even though back then she really wouldn't have a choice in the matter anyway. Anyways, after 10 years of marriage and the birth of an heir, things seemed to be relatively okay between the king and queen. That is until the king started getting all buddy-buddy with his friend Hugh Despenser, who was a much hated noble. Very hated. Hated numero uno. Isabella didn't like the bromance that was forming, and she was like, no, the only person who gets the king's attention is me. So she rallied the support of the other nobles, banished the Despenser family, burned their castles to the ground, claimed their possessions, and killed anyone who supported the disgraced family. After all of that went down, she took refuge in the Tower of London, where she met a prisoner whom she smuggled to France. Then she got her husband to bring their son to France. And from there, with the support of the nobles and the common people, she was able to defeat her husband and the Despensers, and became Queen Regent until her son Edward III came of age to become king. After all of that, she finally got her way. I hope she slept well that night, because she did the most.
Number 5, rebel princess. Princess Leia wasn't the only rebel, okay? Princess Margaret partied with rock stars during the 60s. The queen's younger sister was known as the rebel princess. She was seen for years and years as this, well, bad She passed away in 2002, but even to this day, we're trying to piece together her love life. Pablo Picasso actually wanted to marry her at one point. How fun is that? Also, side note, I didn't realize how recent Pablo Picasso died. That was alarming to find out. Guess my whole life's a lie. Her wedding was the first to be aired on TV. That's quite a big deal. The first televised royal wedding took place on May 6, 1960. In 1968, just 8 years after, word had spread that the princess had an affair at a nightclub with pianist Robin Douglas Home, who only a year and a half later took his own life. Adds a lot of mystery there. Then come 1973, the paparazzi got photos of her with a landscape gardener on her private island. One of the more unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated, believe it or not. She had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. How sweet is that? These acts are unusual when it comes to royalty, but Margaret also supported more than 80 charity organizations. But even then, media still focused on her love life. Classic. Keep it up.
At number 4, Warrior Queen. Let's talk about Queen Rani Lakshmi Bai and how she became known as India's Joan of Arc. Rani was a fighter her whole life. She was raised to be a warrior and was taught how to fight. She even shared her skills with other women, teaching them the same fighting skills at a young age. She was married off to a much older man and she had a child, but she lost them both pretty early on. In need of an heir, she adopted a son and served as Queen Regent, but soon a growing conflict started, causing a lot of tension between the British East Indian Company and her people. The young queen, at just 22 years old, wanted to drive British forces out of her land, and so she organized a revolt that turned bloody very quickly. She ordered the execution of literally every British person in the region. So Bobby from down the street, dead. Mary from around the block, goner. Freddie and Harriet, the kids of that guy that you know who bought shoes off your brother, bye bye. Gone. Rani killed every man, woman, and child in the area, but it still wasn't enough to win against the British. The queen died on the battlefield and the British ended up winning the battle and the kingdom fell to the enemy forces. This queen was one of the bravest and most determined women in history, and she's still remembered as a hero.
Number 3, Chilonis. The reason we look at princesses like Margaret and say she was a rebel is because most of the time these marriages are chosen. Well, rather, women are forced to marry some gross fat dudes. And while he's cheating and eating lobster, the wife has to have his kids and be dutiful. So for the Spartan princess from the 3rd century, she too was forced to marry Cleonymus, this older, horrible man. He was so horrible that he wasn't even allowed to have his father's throne. That's how bad he was. He was in the family and still they're like, no. So Chilonis thought, this guy sucks, the system sucks, I'm gonna go talk to the much more pleasant Architatus, son of King Ares I. Around 272 BC, both these guys, both her lovers, went to war with each other. Drama. How about the tea on that? Chilonis was preparing to hang herself in case her husband won. That's horrible. Now luckily he lost, therefore the princess this time around did really live happily ever after with her other man. That's like an R-rated version of Shrek 2, what I just said. I can't believe people had to go through this in real life. That's horrible.
At number 2, toxic cosmetics. The price of beauty is pretty steep. These days people spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on makeup to make themselves feel beautiful, but back in the day makeup not only cost a pretty penny, but it also cost some serious health concerns. Cosmetics were made of a lot of questionable ingredients that you probably wouldn't find in today's products, but for people like Queen Elizabeth I, she didn't care what she was putting on her skin, so long as she not only looked like a snack, but the whole damn meal. Yeah. Elizabeth had pitting in her skin from when she contracted smallpox at the age of 29, and back then, having blemished skin was a sign that God was a little cheesed with you, or that you were having some wild thoughts like thinking about the sexy time ooh. It was thought that these thoughts bubbled up from your no-no square up to your face and showed everyone that you were sinning. Anyways, to cover up the blemishes, Elizabeth wore a lot of makeup, like her version of foundation, but the ingredients were really just making things worse and not better. The foundation was made with a tincture of white lead ore, vinegar, and sometimes arsenic, hydroxide, and carbonate. To add some color back to her face after applying this pasty white mask, she powdered cinnabar to her lips and cheeks, but this was pretty dangerous because it contained mercury. She did this every day, and as you can imagine, it wasn't good for her health at all. Imagine absorbing all of those chemicals through your face on a daily basis. Not cute.
And finally, number 1. Are you not entertained? Back in the late 1800s, the name Clara Ward would stir up a conversation. She was famous, really famous, for all the wrong reasons, of course. All it took was her bumping into a European royal and Bob's your uncle. Since birth, Clara was born into money. She didn't even need a royal husband. She was born into a wealthy industrialist family. She would sometimes visit the family mills, you know, to make it look good and kind of be like, hey, how's everyone doing? Whatever, just casual visit. But on this one casual visit, she crossed paths with the Prince of Caramanchimay. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back a wife. Carry on. Also, meet my wife. Here she is. People were freaking out, obviously. A royal marrying a common American girl. Wow, how could you? She was the talk of the town. Unlike Meghan Markle, Clara loved to show off with her newfound wealth. Some loved her and her image, but others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician, then after her divorce she had to model to make a living rather than showing off for clout.
Number 10, Elizabeth I. Good old Queen Bess is one of the most remembered queens in the British monarchy, male or female. She's a pretty big deal. Elizabeth loved to make her fellow male nobles fall under her spell. She was witty, cunning, and very well liked by her court. However, one of the things that earned her some enemies was establishing a Protestant England. Her sister Mary, her predecessor, fought very hard for the opposite. She was very Catholic, and we will get to how bloody that was later, but Queen Bess a lot of people off, especially Spain. She was supposed to marry the Catholic Spanish king after her sister passed, but she turned him down. This led to a conflict between Protestant England and Catholic Spain, but her navy defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Mary, Queen of Scots, laid claim to the English throne and was one of Lizzie's greatest internal threats. Mary was a Catholic, which made all the Catholics of England back her. Mary was also presumed to be behind several assassination attempts against the Queen. Finally, Queen Elizabeth had to take action, and after keeping her cousin hostage for 20 years, she finally had to have her executed. And we'll talk more about her later. Number 9, Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him, which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time. Number 8, Grace O'Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilleland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow, as she was considered a queen herself by that point. Number 7, Mary, Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize, as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside, and it turned out he was strangled. So what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth. So that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say. Number 6, Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5, Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4, Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap? No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fridegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild who became the mortal enemy of Fridegund. She had good reason to be. Fridegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady. Number 3, Bathory. Okay. Alright, technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality. Supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2, Catherine de Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French Wars of Religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church, and after having delegitimate legitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Empress of Austria. The saying "wrong place at the wrong time" couldn't be used more in this case. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, she was sadly taken out by somebody who just wanted to attack a royal. He didn't have anything against Elizabeth per se, this man was an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, and that fateful day, September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated that he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level at all. See, what had happened was he intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans, but when Luigi arrived a little too late in Geneva, the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper, saw Elizabeth, and found out where she was staying, and he waited for her to leave that hotel. That's how easy it was. People are so creepy. Keep an eye open. If you're a queen, keep your eyes open. This is scary. Number 9. Royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, a storm had flooded a cathedral, and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area, but on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. These remains, with the crowns still attached, might I add, were from the 15th century. What a find, right? Well, sadly the remains were all over this flooded tomb now. It wasn't really in one spot. It was horrible. And now after these discoveries, that's when things got really mysterious. Those involved in the findings began to die off in unusual circumstances, one after another. And it happened pretty quick too. One professor had died after falling down a shaft in his apartment. He had a heart attack. An engineer had died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues. Okay. Another professor years later who worked in the crypt as well became paralyzed at age 62. A sculptor involved died when untying his shoelace. Just the weirdest way to go out. That's the only details that we know. Just, I don't know, use your imagination I guess. Maybe he fell and hit his head. That's sad, it's tragic. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt as well. I sure hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were trying to preserve their history and avoid the crypt from flooding. Like, I don't know, we need a Ouija board to clear this whole thing up. We were trying to help you with the sandbags. Number 8, Queen Caroline. In a list of unusual ways that people have died, odds are it's going to get a little gruesome, a little messy. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? Right? Some ancient queens die natural causes and then history remembers them for their reign. In this case, history remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she died. It was written in an epigram from the 18th century from a poet named Alexander Pope. He wrote down, "Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels." It rhymes? Like, come on, man, you didn't have to do this. This is horrible. That's like a prank almost. I can't believe somebody was like, yeah, write that down. That's good, that's good. Did it rhyme? Yeah, she'd like that for sure. R.I.P. Number 7, Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII. Yes, we have a few on this list. She was found guilty of treason and she had been charged with having sexual relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. Yeah, the ancient days were a little bit odd. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend. And when I say close friend, I mean he was the groom of the stool, so they were tight. He literally would wipe his. So on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish, basically. Anne wasn't even present when these events went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way in hell she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill in May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her little neck before being taken out with a sword as well. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to go and get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. They used a chest to bury her body near her brother, Lord Rochford. A chest. Horrible. That's so horrible. Number 6, Mary Queen of Scots. If you're a murderino, this one's pretty juicy. Listen up. Back in 1565, Mary was determined to take the throne for herself. When Mary was just 6 days old, her father, King James V, had passed away, so she ascended to the throne. She was about to marry the King of France in 1558, but he passed away, so she returned to Scotland as the country's monarch. Her next plan was to marry her cousin, Lord Darnley, so now if something were to happen to Elizabeth, Mary would be yet again lined up for the throne. That cousin ended up dying in a random explosion, and then years later, in 1568, Queen Elizabeth had welcomed Mary after she fled to England. So Mary was close, but now what? Well, Elizabeth had found out that Mary was involved in English Catholic and Spanish plots to overthrow her, so she was then placed on house arrest. Fair, more than fair, more than fair. Cut to 19 years later, 1586, a letter had emerged revealing that Mary was involved in a plot to have her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, killed. She was then sentenced to death and her head was taken off for treason. History is dark, my friends. Even if you're family, shit gets crazy. Number 5. Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4. Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at 5th wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3. Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart. She was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction. And then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay? Her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrrett, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like broken telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now, as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry. So this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. What do you guys think?
Number 10, Girl Troubles. Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg was a kind and loving mother, so long as you were a boy. Unfortunately for the royal mom, she had a great difficulty giving birth to a male heir. So when her daughter Christina was born, Maria proclaimed that she was given a dark and ugly daughter with black eyes. Eleonora often called her a monster. Oh yeah, and she did try to kill her on several occasions. Nothing says mental stability like blaming your daughter for being a daughter, and not more like a son, because the male-dominated patriarchy that is royal society has no effect on this, right? Number 9, Eyes on Irene. Irene was born into nobility and worked her way up the royal hierarchy. So why is Irene on this list? That's because she's probably the worst mother ever. When her son Constantine grew into adulthood, he made efforts to sideline his mother and challenge her position as a ruler. Irene, feeling some angry mom energy, retaliated in probably the worst way. In 797, Irene organized the capture of her son, and when he tried to escape, ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Constantine would later die of his injuries. Listen, I've had my fair share of minutes clocked out in the timeout corner. You can ask any one of my teachers, they'll tell you. And maybe even a few times today I should be put in the timeout corner too. But holy shit, mom, eye gouging? I ain't that bad. Sheesh. Number 8. No cake for you. Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France, and for good reason. To make a long story short, she was part of the upper class nobility who benefited from the poor and overworked. When in a time of economic ruin, she still found a way to live a life of excess, while literally everyone else suffered. Spending all of France's money on completely ridiculous items, even by Lady Gaga standards, she jokingly became known as Madame Deficit. Eventually, she would be executed in the Revolution. The expression "let them eat cake" was most likely not said by her or by anyone, but regardless if it was, it's a statement to show the complete disconnect and ignorance the nobility had when understanding just how bad things were for the working class. They most likely didn't care either. People were starving and putting heads on pikes. Do you really think they had time for cake, Your Highness? Oh, to be as beautiful and ignorant as an 18th century queen. Number 7. Lover's touch. Some couples flourish, others fizzle out. Some keep their privacy, and others like to make out in the hallways, right in front of everyone. Yeah, you know the ones. It's always by a classroom you have to walk by, or it's by your locker. Joanna of Castile leans more towards awkward locker makeouts. It's speculated that she may have had some form of mental illness. After her mother fell ill, she was reported not to be eating or sleeping, which doesn't sound that bad actually. She was also a very envious person who oftentimes expressed her distaste for her husband's mistresses, reportedly attacking one on occasion, which again, doesn't sound that bad. And when her husband died of illness, she kept very close to the man's body and traveled over 600 kilometers with it, where he was to be buried, where she would often open the casket and embrace the cadaver, and kiss him. Oh, okay, that's where the unholiness is, gotcha. I know medical knowledge wasn't great, but if your husband died of an illness, you couldn't seriously think that kissing him was a good idea. This is like the third royal I've come across that has a fixation on corpses. Sometimes you just gotta let the dead be dead, man. Number 6, who you gonna call? Queen Maria I of Portugal might have actually been insane. And no, not like come on down to my local car dealership, these prices are insane, more like the Joker on a magic white powder that shan't be named just in case. I don't want to make YouTube big Angie. She was known for ranting and raving, screaming that she had been damned. Perhaps it was phantoms of the night demonizing the poor soul. In attempts to cure her madness, such advanced scientific treatments like bloodletting and enemas were tried in order to cure her. The enema kind of makes sense. Maybe she's a little blocked up. It happens, I don't know. There were other attempts to cure her of her madness, but nothing seemed to work. While her first years in power were good, no one was ready for what they got afterwards. Hi, yes, I'm calling from the royal court. We think the queen needs an exorcism. Yeah, we tried that. Yeah, we tried that too. Yes, and we did try the tried and true method of enema, yes. How soon can you get here? Oh, okay, perfect. Yep. Yes, I am available between the hours of 8 to 5. Number 5. A2 Brute. Agrippina of Rome was like many mothers, in the sense that she would do anything for her kids. I'm sure every mom at home watching would scheme and slaughter their way through Roman nobility in order for her son to become emperor, right? I mean, come on, it's for the family after all. She only did it a few times, and seized the wealth of nobles, which further solidified her powerful position. And her son, her beautiful baby boy Nero. How did the young lad return the favor of all this bloodthirst and treachery? Like mother, like son. Chose to fatally remove her of her power. What a nice family story right there. My mom usually just makes turkey with the stuffing, but maybe I can ask for the Roman throne this Christmas. Mom! Number 4. Revenge. Boudica was the wife of a man who had spent his time serving the Roman Empire. So when a deal was altered Darth Vader style by the Romans over what would happen to her husband's kingdom, she was pissed. Karen pissed. To be fair, she did have a point. They did unsavory and unholy things to her and her daughters. Plus, the Romans totally lied about not annexing their kingdom. Okay, so now it was time for some revenge. She gathered all the people she could and went on the attack. The Romans surprisingly did not fare that well. Boudica was having such good luck she decided to burn London down. Of course, no civilians were harmed in the process. I'm just kidding, a lot of people probably didn't do too well, as humans can't live in fire. Sure, she was owed some revenge, but burning down a whole city? That's a lot. The Romans did eventually catch up, and she was forced to drink poison in order to avoid capture. She is remembered as somewhat of a hero to some. Number 3. Girl power. Tamar of Georgia was a woman who didn't take kindly to men questioning the rule of a woman, as you would wind up dead. She is noted for having a hand in the golden age of Georgia. Funny enough, she was made a saint, even though she vanquished all the Orthodox clergymen at the time for also questioning her rule. Her husband aided in conquering more land, but when he couldn't keep it in his pants, she banished him and remarried. You go, girl. You commit acts of unholiness and stand up for yourself. Number 2. Serial killer? Daria Saltkova was not necessarily a queen, but she was Russian nobility. She had strong connections with the royal court and other Russian nobility. She was also very unholy. Now, maybe you can blame it on her being widowed. Maybe she's just crazy. But her actions were sadistic. She's noted for having severely tormented her serfs and would straight up just kill them, with numbers reaching at least 138. At first, complaints about family members disappearing after working for her royal nightmare were ignored. She was just too powerful and connected. Eventually, a petition was put together and shown to Catherine the Great, where it was decided Daria would be tried publicly. She spent 1 hour in a public space in Moscow where people scorned her for her crimes. She was then sentenced to prison, where the rest of her days were spent. She is also at times compared to Elizabeth Bathory, who committed similar non-nightmare-inducing crimes. Just kidding, they were an absolute nightmare. Number 1. Her Royalness Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II may be the modern Queen of England, but that does not make her free of controversy and unholiness. If you are to believe in conspiracy theories, then perhaps old Blighty had a hand in a few things that to a normal person would be considered immoral. The death of Princess Diana immediately comes to mind, as there is some evidence to suggest the family is behind it, and her being the queen and all, it's easy to make the connection. But perhaps the most unholy crime ever committed, apparently the queen likes her sandwiches with the crust cut off. Imagine all the extra time needed to trim the crust off every sandwich. I want to talk to HR just thinking about all the extra work. But maybe you can cut the crust off of mine? Don't tell anyone though. Okay, thanks. Number 10, moving in. I don't know about you guys, but when I think of old Blighty, I think of royal prestige. London and Buckingham Palace. After all, that's what a queen needs. You gotta have a palace. Where's my palace? Although most people think of the queen living in Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria was the first of the royal family to do so. I'm not royalty, but I wouldn't mind crashing a few days there. Nice big place, servants, probably all you can eat. Man, she had it good. All that's missing is Wi-Fi. Move over, Your Royal Highness, I'm moving in. Just gotta get my collection of Sailor Moon memorabilia. Number 9, Queen Jeans. No, not a nice pair of royal genes. I'm talking about DNA and hereditary genes. I've mentioned a few times on this channel how the royal family may or may not have been inbreeding. Okay, who am I kidding? There was a lot of inbreeding going on. Sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, cousins, and of course, hey step bro. Now, as lovely as that seems to some, unfortunately, crossing the hall to reproduce can have ill effects, as inbreeding is known to have complications with birth and their offspring. Well, Queen Victoria may have been the first carrier of hemophilia B, a blood-clotting disease. While not having it herself, it's thought she passed it down through royals related all throughout Europe. Tsar Nicholas II's son comes to mind. However, I feel like if we told the royals why people were contracting certain illnesses, they would still do what they want anyway. So I'll just close the door. You guys can go ahead and do what you're gonna do. Number 8. Breaking tradition. For men in Western culture, it has been a long time of bending the knee to propose to the woman that you love, or so wish to swoon. Tammy Lynn, I don't got much, but I know I got this ring I found behind a Chuck E. Cheese. So what I would like to do is Jim Bob Billy Abernathy, I'm asking for your hand in marriage. So romantic. Anyway, bad jokes aside, you'd be wrong in thinking that's how it went for Old Blighty. When the young monarch met her cousin, Albert, the love juices were flowing. She knew she was gonna have to lock him in and propose to him before he could get the chance. They were shortly married soon after, and as stated in her diaries, it seemed that the couple was truly in love, which for royals is kind of rare. Even today, it's usually men who propose to ladies, but all I'm gonna say is, ladies, I'm 300 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal, and I put the toothpaste lid back on after brushing my teeth, so... Number 7. Did you miss me? Queen Victoria was a leader. She held a lot of power, and that means people sometimes got a little crazy and wanted to remove her from such power. So for Queen Victoria, it should be no surprise, however uncouth it was, but she had multiple assassination attempts on her life. A lot of which were people firing shots at her carriage for some reason with a pistol. And a lot of these attempts leading people to being declared insane. And one specific amateur who tried multiple times to end the royal and failed every time. 8 times to be specific. I feel like after the first 4 times when the guard saw this guy approach, it was like, oh, man, this guy again. Oh, brother, this guy stinks. Anyway, all attempts to end her life failed, and she became the 2nd longest reigning queen, next to Queen Elizabeth, of course. Number 6. Oh, Christmas tree, oh, Christmas tree. I was honestly shooketh when I learned this, but you know that thing a lot of people do around the holiday season where they get a big green tree and they like decorate it because of the holiday called like Christmas? You might have heard of it. Yeah, I've never heard of it either. Bad jokes aside, the queen and her husband may have popularized the Christmas tradition of decorating the tree after sending trees to local schools and army barracks. An image of the family decorating the tree was also published that Christmas. I wonder if they popularized any other traditions as well, like your aunt drinking too much wine, and that one uncle, no matter how many times he's told, says something at the dinner table that would have him sitting in HR so fast that, well, he'd be sitting in the HR office for saying something like that in public. Everyone's got an uncle like that. Number 5, the Terror of London. If you're into serial killers and just a little goth or emo, I mean who isn't, then you know who Jack the Ripper is. If you don't, he was a serial killer who roamed the streets of Victorian England and killed multiple women of the evening, in what can be called the first, or one of the first, modern serial killers. Jack the Ripper, however, is one of the psychos who got away. No one is 100% sure on who the Terror of London was. However, that hasn't stopped people from theorizing on his or her true identity. No, not Queen Victoria herself, although there are some who believe he was a woman, which would explain how he got away so easily. However, another popular theory is that it was the Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor. While there isn't much evidence to support this claim, or any of the claims really, it is interesting and makes me wonder, maybe the royal was a killer? We'll never know. Number 4, Short Kings Unite! Even though I'm a semi-charming and moderately handsome internet host, I suffer from an illness a lot of men do. I suffer from shortness. When the Lord was making me, he just put a few extra drops of cute in the mix. And then there was no more room for my legs to grow. I just see life from a little bit down below. Although, I own it, and thank God I don't have little man syndrome. All toxic jokes aside, Queen Victoria may have been a good fit for us short kings, as she was barely 5 feet tall. She's known for being a formidable queen, but when you're that short, it can sometimes be difficult to keep your stature. Somebody take me seriously. Number 3, dollies. Okay, so maybe my Sailor Moon merch collection is weird. Maybe I just want to be a cute blonde Japanese girl with a short skirt fighting evil. Can you blame me? However, something I always find strange, no matter who it is and who owns it, is a doll collection. Why? Just why? And it's never a couple, it's always a large collection. And tell me why anytime you go to visit someone and stay overnight, they always put you in a guest room where the majority of the dolls reside. There's nothing like 100 pair of creepy plastic eyes staring you down while you're trying to sleep in a bed that isn't yours. Well, Her Royal Majesty had her own collection of dolls. Yeah, that's right. You can just imagine the kind of treatment these dolls received. It's said she had hundreds of them and most likely wore higher quality clothes than most common folk at the time. Great, now my worst nightmares outnumber me and they're dressed to the nines. Whew, dolls are just creepy. Number 2, here comes the bride. Imagine being so powerful, so mighty, and influential that you'll create 2 Western traditions. Sure, the Christmas tree is great, but I'd argue the white wedding dress is more. She wasn't the first to wear a white wedding dress, but she was the one that made it happen. There's a few reasons why, and the obvious one is flexing that royal coin, but imagine trying to keep pure white clothes clean in the past. My mom makes a mean spaghetti and meatballs, and I have a difficult time keeping those stains off my white t-shirts, which, if you also ask my mom, is a bad color for me. I was a messy kid. That's why other colors at the time made sense. After all, there's no dry cleaning in the 1800s. At least not with modern machines and stain remover. Hey Alexa, can you add stain remover to my list? Number 1. Send lewds. Despite being known as a somewhat prudent queen, apparently the queen had an eye for the art that was lewd. In one case, the royal husband and wife gave each other art. She got some nice work, and he got some nice works, if you catch my drift. We all know how nudity and lewd imagery can be treated by those who wish to censor it. Queen Victoria felt the opposite and had somewhat of an appreciation for the human form, even commissioning a lewd painting of herself. At least lewd for the time, it was more like a wrist and ankles kind of thing, but you know. Number 10, Marie Antoinette. I wonder what it must have been like to be the Queen of France. To sit in a palace and eat all those delicious foods that your cooks can make while the peasants outside struggle to eat and sing about bread for some reason. I don't know, Les Mis reference. It's a life of beauty, balls, and not listening to what the stinky peasants outside have to say. Except that's the very reason why Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France. You can only spend so much time and money on your exuberant lifestyle before the people get fed up. I mean, these people have nothing. It's kind of difficult to control people when they don't even have food at home. They let the queen know how upset they were when they decided to remove her head from her body. Number 9. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Sometimes it's just in the name, isn't it? Like Mario, you know that he's an Italian plumber. Or Luigi, you can tell that that's an Italian plumber's brother. And King Dedede, king of the DDDs or something. I don't know. Okay, maybe the names don't always give it away, but Bloody Mary does. Most known for her liberal use of the wooden stake and the whole burning folks alive thing. I wish I could tell you it was for barbecue, but it was actually for some more serious religious persecution and reformation. The Catholic Church was hot, but the witches and heretics burning at the stake were hotter. No cap. Number 8, Reina Valona of Madagascar. This one is a new one for me. Didn't know about this, but here we go. So basically, Queen I'm just gonna call her Queen Ravioli because I can't pronounce it. Basically, Queen Ravioli takes over from her past husband. She says to herself, how can I make things better? Oh, I know. How about I become a ruthless, bloodthirsty, unaliving tyrant? Great idea, right? Yes, very not great success. Yes, unfortunately she did many heinous things. Something I found out to be particularly interesting, however, was her destroying the many good things her husband had set up before her. Madagascar had some European intervention, and while it's true that a lot of times that is a bad thing, and yeah, it's a bad thing, and it does bring some bad stuff with it, however, it also brings a lot of good things with it. In Madagascar's case, it was markets, modern schools, trade, and diplomacy with Europe, and that's good. Money's good, you like that. Well, the queen wasn't having any of that, so she reformed. And by that I mean she repressed and unalived people. Number 7, Empress Irene. Kings, queens, emperors, and empresses. Chances are these folks are related. It's a family thing. And mia familia, you know what I mean? It's how it goes when you're the king, and you need a son to continue the lineage. Even though I would like to argue that if you're gone, you're gone. So who really cares who's taken over? Just my opinion. Speaking of eye gouging, oh wait, I didn't mention that before. I made a segue, but okay, that's alright, bad segue. Well, the topic of discussion here is Empress Irene. Basically, her son was taking too much power for himself. She was losing hers, and yada yada, and his eyes were gouged out from 2 guards ordered by his dear, sweet mother. Can you blame her though? I mean, come on, he was threatening a rule. She worked so hard to get there. The chief was just silent on this one. Chief had no words for that one, guys. No words. Number 6, Fu Hao. Another woman in history married to a man in the stinky patriarchy. Worst! Except Fu Hao didn't want to be wife 57 of 64. She wanted more than that. And to be honest, I think that's fair. You go, girl. Who wants to be wife 57 of 64? Maybe some people in Utah, I don't know. What's maybe slightly more unholy than having that many wives is going on an epic military campaign and raging war in the Shang dynasty. A warrior queen, if you will. We know some of this history based on her tomb, as she was buried with ceremonial weapons, knives, blades, swords, some dogs, some human sacrifices, gold, money, jade, and lots of other valuable goodies. Just makes you want to loot all the stuff in there, doesn't it? I mean, jade's pretty cool. This was a common practice amongst male warriors back then, but you know what? Good for her and all that unaliving. Way to go, sister. I like it. Very nice. Okay. Number 5, Tamiris. Honestly, every time I face her in Civilization 6, it just ends badly. I'll spend a few turns building my economy or maybe organizing some troops, and I look back over at her cities and she's already amassed a massive army and is ahead in science. Yeah, I'm not the best Civ 6 player, but sheesh lady, come on, give me a break. This probably has something to do with her real life counterpart. Tamiris was a woman who lost her son to Cyrus the Great. So she said to herself, I don't know what's so great about this Cyrus guy. There's a Trailer Park Boys reference in there somewhere. Just imagine Ricky telling Cyrus off. I don't know, you gotta find it. Basically, after losing her son, she gathered the troops and commenced battle. The almighty Cyrus met his end, which, given how the way women were treated back then, probably didn't go over too well with PR. Yeah, she got her revenge though. Number 4, the Trung sisters. The Trung sisters are double trouble. You're getting 2 queens at once here. China was being down bad and trying to conquer some things that maybe they shouldn't have. Naughty, no. The Trung sisters came to answer the call. These girls are actually revered as heroes still today in Vietnam. But what they were able to do for so long was very impressive. China had a very impressive army, no surprise there, and Vietnam was a much smaller country, or kingdom I guess you'd say, and their army was not as impressive. But the sisters managed to hold them off for 3 years. 3 years with their forces. That is crazy good. That is very impressive, and perhaps a lot of bloodshed too. Sadly, the sisters waded off into the waters before they could be captured, because after that long fighting, I wouldn't want to be captured either. Number 3, Grace O'Malley. Avasi landlubbers, ye be looking for Grace O'Malley. Well then ye come to the right place, sir. Thank you, thank you. That is my private impression. I will be here all week. Bad impressions aside, Grace O'Malley wasn't a traditional queen, to be fair, but what she didn't have in regular queen qualities, she did make up for that in being a badass pirate. Nice. This is another one where I'm gonna ask Hollywood for a movie, please. Irish pirate queen? Come on guys, that's just a movie begging to be made. Grace O'Malley was a fierce pirate from the age of 11 and a wise woman who ruled the seas after her father's passing. I don't really have much to say after that, to be honest. I'll just wait for Hollywood to make their move. And maybe you can cast me in there. And I can put on some long red hair and some boots, and I could swim and just put the red hair on me right now. I just look so good. Number 2, Queen Victoria. Okay, hear me out on this one. This one has more to do with their lineage, per se, than her, but it's her somewhat to blame. Okay, so Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of Britain, and Wilhelm Kaiser II of Germany were all first cousins. Their grandma was Queen Victoria. What? I know, right? Isn't that weird? Yeah, it's weird. Imagine how crazy your bloodline has to be for that. And, you know, the fact that during World War I, all 3 of these cousins were at war with each other. I mean, that's just insane. I mean, families fight, sure, but come on, man. Get the mustard gas off the table, bro. Come on. That's cheap. Just don't. Number 1, my mom. My mom. I love her so much. She's the best. But man, sometimes, she's so unfair. I had to do chores when I was a kid, and I had to put down the toilet seat, and worst of all, she made me put the little toothpaste back in the tube when I was done with it. Ugh! I mean, come on, right? Not like she ever did anything for me, like birth me, feed me, raise me, clothe me, and love me unconditionally. And now I gotta make my bed? Oh, this is the worst day ever! I'm sure no other cute boy with blue eyes like me ever had this problem. Ugh! Number 10, Marie Antoinette, Madame Deficit, the last queen of France and maybe the last time royals got away with, well, being royals. Her whole existence was opulence, which is really just salt in the wound when most of your citizens probably can't even afford a portion of salt because they're broke or because there's food shortages. Wasn't a good time. But if you looked into the royal palace, you can bet she's got a pantry full of bread and a bowl of fruit just ready for the pickings. She even had the nerve to purchase a necklace that, if through today's inflation, would be worth $12 million US. Ooh, that's a lot of money I wish I had. People were starving, and honestly, if people don't have anything, including food, ooh, it's not gonna be a good time. Imagine a whole country acting up because they haven't had their Snickers yet. Well, that ended up sparking a revolution. Very confusing, and in all that confusion, both the king and queen lost their heads. Wasn't good. Number 9, Queen Victoria. Oh blighty. Man, it must be nice to have a whole era in history named after you. Maybe I'll get one day. The cheddar time. I don't know. Cheese, I don't know, big ched? We'll see what happens. Queen Victoria had some strange quirks about her. One that I can almost get behind, but not quite, is her niche for eating fast. Maybe too fast. I'm a guy who likes to make things simple, easy meals. The faster I can slip into a couch with an ice cold beer and a movie, I'm a happy guy. And or enjoy said food with the movie. Queen Victoria liked her meals to last no longer than 30 minutes. That means while you're on the appetizer, she's on the main course. And while you're on the main course, she's ordering coffee. Look, I respect the hustle. I get that. But maybe this is too much. That being said, are you going to be the one who brings it up to Her Royal Majesty? Listen, if you want to see tomorrow's 5-minute brunch, you better keep it to yourself. Number 8, Cleopatra. Don't we all miss Elizabeth Taylor? I know I do. Sometimes, I wish I was her. She's just beautiful. Can you blame me? I honestly wish I was the real Cleopatra too though. All that power, and to not have one, but 2 Romans wrapped around her finger. Ooh, she was the last pharaoh of Egypt, but maybe had the most drama. Sure, Elizabeth Taylor was the most beautiful and chic woman in all of Hollywood, and she may or may not have had a few men wrapped around her finger too, but she never had to deal with the world's largest empire and her own throne, all whilst managing to stay the most beautiful and chic. I can barely manage to toast in the morning. Never mind all those affairs and, well, the marriage affairs too. There's a lot of affairs happening. Number 7, Queen Isabella of Spain. Queen Isabella is known for a few things. A lot of stuff YouTube probably doesn't want me to talk about. Insert religious persecution here. However, I think she should be remembered for something else. Something rather strange. When I was a kid, I would run around outside for hours, oftentimes ending up in the mud. My mother would always say, "It's time to hose you down, son." And she wasn't wrong, because I probably needed a good hose down. Now, regardless of how much dirt was behind my ears, I didn't want to wash. I was this big stupid kid, can you blame me? I was proud of the scruff, but that's because I was going to have another wash most likely within the next 12 hours. I always got hosed down at some point. Queen Isabella, however, boasted to others that she only bathed twice in her life. Sweet Lord Mary Mother of God woman, that is not something to boast about. Due to some water access issues, the Catholic Church was like, baths? Who needs them? You know what? Baths are sinful anyway. Being so close to God, so she doesn't bathe. Cleanliness is next to godliness, except in that time period where not bathing means you're actually closer to the big JC upstairs, so that's how it goes. Number 6, Queen Elizabeth II. No crusts! Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch. God bless the Queen, and God save the Queen. Shout out to the UK, Chetty loves you, how you doing? Come and see me sometime, I love you guys. Now sure, she's not the most awful spoiled queen in history, but she is a queen, and that does mean she can have things her way. Like for example, all of her sandwiches have to have the crusts cut off. Yes, just like children. Yes, just the way I like them too. No, I'm not a big baby. I'm a big strong man who totally doesn't rely on the women in his life. No, what are you saying? Dude, stop. Mom, I love you. Anyway, well, yes, it's true the queen's sandwiches have to have her crust cut off. Is it the worst thing ever? No, I don't think so, but what if her sandwich showed up with crust? We don't really burn people at the stake anymore, so what would she do? Would she fire them, I guess? It's kind of a little thing to get fired over. I don't know. Anyway, speaking of getting fired, Number 5. Empress Irene. Mother dearest. Most people have fond memories of their mothers. Maybe you should call her. I'm just saying, Mother's Day happened, you should call her. Empress Irene was a woman who wanted power. Honestly, who doesn't? We've all got a little bit of Sith in us. Yes. Her son, who had naturally inherited some of her power, was growing stronger by the day. Now, maybe it was ego, maybe it was envy, maybe her son just took down her live, laugh, love signs. I'm not sure. But Irene was not having any of it. So, when her son least expected it, she had 2 guards apprehend him and had his eyes gouged out. Now, being that this was before 2022, this was a critical medical injury, and after 9 days of grueling pain, and when I'm sure it was a lot of blind confusion, the injury proved to be fatal. So, what's the lesson here? Blood is not as thick as water? I don't really know, it's just messed up. Number 4, Queen of Castile. Life can be tough sometimes, especially when we lose the ones we love the most. Everybody deals with things differently. The Queen of Castile is a person who deals with that, well, very differently. People passing on was no rare occurrence back in those days. There's 1,000 reasons on how you could wind up 6 feet under. When the Queen of Castile's husband passed away from the disease of the month, she was devastated. Rightfully so, that's rough. However, that being said, sometimes you gotta take that with a little grace. For days she would not leave her husband's side, even after he was a cold cadaver. Later on, that corpse would travel with her, apparently even stopping a carriage once to get out and kiss his feet. It's Weekend at Bernie's, except a lot sadder and gross. And not a charming 80s movie. Ugh. Number 3, Carlotta of Mexico. This is a new one for me, but an interesting story nonetheless. Basically, France wanted a piece of Mexico, and I mean, come on, who doesn't? It's gorgeous. Carlotta was a Belgian princess who kinda just married into the royal family and got plopped down in some chaos in Mexico. There was a war, enough political strife to make anyone involved in the Watergate scandal start to look for documents. It was messy, it wasn't a good time. It got so bad that she had to go back to Europe and basically made the call that all university students have to make after Frosh Week. Hey mom, dad, listen, yeah, I'm great. Do you think maybe you could send me some money? Yeah, I need some help. Except her phone call wasn't like that. Her phone call was more like, hey, European nobility, can you come please save my husband because he's about to get de-lifed and like stabilize the country? Thanks. Spoiled princess calling. Hi. It didn't work out in the end. He got de-lifed, she went back home, and well, she went a little crazy. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. Serial de-lifers, your queen has arrived. I think this one is one of the more interesting cases in history. Usually when you think of a creepy de-lifer that lurk in the night, you think of Gacy, Dahmer, you know, guys like that. It's not very often that it's a woman and or someone from before the 19th or 20th century. That's just how it goes. I'd also argue perishing and manual de-lifing was a part of life back in medieval times, so kind of hard to quantify what is and isn't a serial de-lifer or life taker. However, I think she counts. The body count is estimated to be somewhere in the hundreds, and a most peculiar rumor is that she bathed in the blood of her victims. Ooh, that's gross. Bathing in water. That checks out. Bathing in mud. You go to a spa. That checks out too. Bathing in beer. Sticky and strange, but check. I've done it. One time I did that. Bathing in blood. That's a no calzone for me, chief. While the bathing in blood thing might be false, the evidence of her crimes were not. Imagine being so spoiled you can hide bodies. Number 1, Queen Mary. Henry VIII was a big bad dude who wanted it his way. He wasn't the Burger King, although by looking at him you could tell he was packing a few of those bad boys away too. No, he was the King of England and he had many wives and was spoiled himself. So, do you think his children grew up humble and wise? Nay, kind sir and madam. Queen Mary took the throne a few years later and wasn't happy with the Protestants. Ugh, too many, she said to herself. Well, if you've heard us talk about her before, she'll probably come up again time and time again because, well, she cooked those people on a wooden stake. Over her reign, countless people felt the fires of her wrath, hence the name Bloody Mary.
Number 10, Irene of Athens. First off, it's safe to say that all these people were a little spoiled. Like the royal family times 1,000. When you're named after cities, you were like rich. Irene of Athens was Byzantine's empress to Emperor Leo IV and co-ruler from 792 until 797, mother to son Constantine VI, and sole ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Yeah, that's quite a resume, Irene. The quote, untimely death, okay, of her husband caused the throne to fall to her. Interesting. Although when Irene's son Constantine was a teen, several revolts tried to make him sole ruler. Mom caught on in 797, and Irene gouged out both of her son's eyes and imprisoned him, dying shortly after. Talk about grounded, dude. Mom's in that unconditional love, huh? A revolt years later overthrew Irene and exiled her to a remote island where Irene died months later. History's dark, huh? She's like, I'm gonna count to 3, and then I'm gonna rip out your eyes. 1, 2...
Number 9, Valeria Messalina. Turning the clocks back to 17, you know, the year 17, just 17 AD, a classic. That in 2016, solid years. Metaphorically and literally, ancient Romans paved the way for following civilizations. They achieved some groundbreaking stuff in their time, but the empress of the Romans at that time, from 17 AD to 48 AD, Valeria Messalina, well, she was too focused on a more lavish business rather than ruling over armies at that time. Many accounts in history can confirm this. Pliny the Elder wrote about it as well, so you know it's the real deal. Valeria, she owned a big, fancy house where ladies of the evening would come and go. She made a lot of money. This is where the finest ladies who weren't even involved in that kind of lifestyle or that kind of business, this is where they changed their minds. Know what I mean? It was a big deal. She was changing the game. Because of Valeria and the operation she was running, sometimes Valeria herself would participate in these games. Yeah, contests, if I may, to see who could tango with the most people in one night. Yeah, Valeria hit 25 in one night, so yeah, I'd say she ruined a few parties, for sure. I mean, her husband, Emperor Claudius, would at least agree, no?
Number 8, Catherine de Medici. Catherine de Medici was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559 with marriage to King Henry II, and mother of 4 future French kings, Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III. The years during which all her sons reigned have been called the Age of Catherine de Medici, as she has extensive influence in politics in France at the time. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, she raised those boys. She was like the secret hand making all the decisions, but she was cool and subtle. She's basically the Kris Jenner of her time. She married Henry, second son of King Francis, and after the king took part in some friendly jousting, he was smashed in the face and the splinters took his life days later. Ouch. Catherine then and her frail 15-year-old son were king and queen. When he died, she took power again till her 10-year-old son was ready. After that, he died, same thing for the third son. The age expectancy was abysmal back then. She ruled with her youngest until her illness in her late 40s.
Number 7, Queen Ranavalona I, the last queen of Madagascar. Where to begin? Queen Ranavalona, one of the worst in history. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years. She was cruel, violent, and would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she just went mad with power. It's pretty sad. In the late 1700s, the king brought peace to the land, but of course there were traditionalists who opposed him, as everywhere that happens. And the king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king. Okay. The king repaid said local by adopting his daughter being Ranavalona. And now she was set to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now when her prince was alive, they didn't get along, and then come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. It's also theorized, of course, that she, you know, poisoned him, so that's probable and horrible. Ranavalona kept away the advances of the French and the British and left bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. Yeah, just to give you an idea of how she handled things. Yuck.
Number 6, Bloody Mary. England's first female monarch, Mary I, ruled for just 5 years. The only surviving child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary took the throne after the brief reign of her half-brother. They say she was an evil queen, but after doing my homework, yeah, I'd have some chips on my shoulders as well. Married at 9 and 11? Everyone's just yelling at you because you're too young to have kids? Yeah, that's awful. She was promoted and demoted so many times, no wonder she did what she did. Every time she was close to the throne, all of a sudden her family tree was just like rearranged by law. Her dad decided to go down the other family route. Nice, nice. She's infamously remembered for burning 300 English Protestants at the stake, which earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. Her brother found a loophole with religion, so she was like, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, light him up. She's also famously remembered as teaming up with her half-sister Elizabeth I and ruling together as sisters, making them the first 2 British queens. She was spoiled from birth, but she's kind of a badass. Anyone that did her harm, past or present, they were either sent to the Tower or the chopping block. checkmate.
Number 5. Empress Agrippina. Continuing on from 48 AD, the next leading lady in charge of ancient Rome was Julia Agrippina. And right off the bat, she was already spoiled. Yeah, she lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor, of course she did. She had a family, but still, that somehow all wasn't enough for Empress Agrippina. And she wanted more. Julia was quite ambitious, and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors, of course, as one would. She believed that her and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she lied her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing Roman law just so they could get married. Yeah, love it. Gotta change the rules, I guess. We can do that? Okay. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, suddenly, just out of the blue, oh no, Claudius passed away. Crazy. Most people think Julia had something to do with it. That's likely the case. The Empress and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so she could, hold on to that little bit of power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mom talking over his shoulders. He's like, you know what? No, you go to your room. How does that sound? Nero then had her forced out of said power, and Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most. And so she rallied a group of supporters to try and, overthrow the power, but plans backfired and she was expelled instead. Yeah, I'm watching a lot of Survivor right now. In Survivor, we call that a blind side, Jeff. Here we go. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Ptolemy, I had to.
Number 4. Diane de Poitiers. Diane de Poitiers was a French noblewoman. She held power and influence as King Henry II's royal mistress and advisor until his death. And at the tender age of 15, Diane was married to Louise de Breze, the much older and grandson to the King of France. They had 2 daughters, Francois and Louise. After his death, she took interest in another very powerful man, her childhood crush, friend, and the new king. Henry married to Catherine de Medici. Wait, like that, Catherine? Yeah. Oh yeah, talk about a bizarre love triangle of power. After he got clocked in the face and died in a jousting accident like I said before, Diane adopted the habit of wearing black and white for the rest of her life. Queen Catherine de Medici soon assumed control though, restricting her access to the royal chambers from Henry's deathbed and not even allowing her at the royal funeral. I mean, she's a married woman. Wives and their husbands' mistresses. Copying her style, stealing her man and her crown, she was exiled, comfortably. Like early rich retirement. Spoiled. What do you think?
Number 3. Princess Margaret. Princess Leia wasn't the only rebel, okay? Princess Margaret I have to mention. She partied with rock stars during the 60s, okay? I'm not gonna leave her out of this list. The Queen's younger sister was known as the Rebel Princess. She was seen for years and years as this badass, I guess, in the media, whatever. She passed away in 2002, but even to this day, we're trying to piece together her love life. Yeah, Pablo Picasso actually wanted to marry the princess. How fun is that? Also, I didn't realize how recent Pablo Picasso died. That was alarming. That was a wake-up call. Guess my whole life's a lie. Sick. Hit that thumbs up button if you also agree that Pablo's more recent. Insane. Her wedding was the first to be aired on TV, okay? She was a big deal. The first televised royal wedding took place on May 6, 1960. Now, in 1968, word had spread that the princess had an affair with nightclub pianist Robin Douglas Home, who just a year and a half later sadly took his own life. And then come 1973, paparazzi got photos of her with a landscape gardener on her private island. Ooh la la. Ooh, big zoom on that one. One of the more unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated. Yeah, she had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. Yeah, how dare her decide what she wants to do with her body post-death.
Number 2, Cleopatra. Talk about spoiled. Cleopatra Philopator was queen of the Kingdom of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC and its last active ruler. From both Roman and Egyptian blood, Cleopatra accompanied her father, Ptolemy XII, into exile to Rome. But after a revolt in Egypt, his rival daughter Berenice claimed his throne. Ooh, siblings, am I right? What are you looking at? Berenice was killed in 55 BC when Ptolemy, her, and Cleopatra's brother returned to Egypt with a Roman military and took revenge. Yeah, more siblings. When dad died, the reign of Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII was born, and short-lived, because arch nemesis Julius Caesar and him kinda hated each other. And yet, another war. Cleopatra sided with her brother's foe this time. Yeah, lots of switching sides back and forth, huh? Not a lot of loyalty in these families. I don't know. Eventually she cheated on him with Mark Antony, resulting in yet another war. After Antony was defeated, it led her love to take his own life out of shame and guilt. When Cleopatra found out about this, she poisoned herself following him into the afterlife. Yeah, that's loyalty. That's true love. The OG Romeo and Juliet. Also, Shakespeare does a wonderful show around the affairs and power of these two. Eternity was in our lips and in our eyes. Antony, Act 1, Scene 1. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. Lovely.
And number 1, Clara Ward. Back in the late 1800s, the name Clara Ward would stir up quite the conversation. She was famous, but for all the wrong reasons, of course. All it took was her bumping into a European royal. That's it, the rest is history. Since birth though, Clara was born into money. She didn't even need a royal husband in the first place, okay? She was born into a wealthy industrialist family. But she would sometimes visit the family mills, make it look good, shake some hands, get some photos. Hey, yeah, nice button, awesome, see you later. She's involved, she's part of the team. But then she crossed paths with the Prince of Karaman, Kime. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back with him said wife. People were freaking out at this point. A royal married a common American girl? This is unheard of. She was the talk of every town. See, unlike Meghan Markle, Clara loved to show off her newfound wealth. Some loved her in her image, others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician, and after her divorce, she turned to modeling. So yeah, it seems like she was in it for one reason. I don't know. I feel like she enjoyed the clout, just a little bit, right? Just a bit.
Number 1 is context on the missing queens. Lexi de los Santos, a Nat Geographic promoter, perfectly describes the treatment of Egyptian queens. Out of all the ancient civilizations, Egypt was the only one that really valued women, but after their rule, male leaders just erased all memory of these women because they didn't want them to have all that success. But why would ancient men in a culture that respected and revered women still strike them off the record in a fit of primal jealousy when they've been regal? It was best explained in the recent Bumblebee video, Top 10 Messed Up Things That Happened to Women in Ancient Egypt. It's the blame game. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were supposed to be the human incarnate of the gods, but one thing that the male gods, female gods, and human females all had in common was the truest power, the womb. The ability to create and birth life, Ra's greatest creation. All of mankind came from Ra, the king god, yet any man who sat on the throne as pharaoh, meant to be the incarnate of Ra, was missing that one true power. So what that meant is any time a female pharaoh took the throne, she was more akin to the king god by the Egyptians' own definition than the male pharaoh ever could be. Call that a mic drop. Consequently, if the womb wielders had a built-in facet of power that you can't regulate, recreate, nor have for yourself, chances are you're gonna be pretty snubbed. So if she's also a better ruler than her male counterparts, you're going to be resentful. Unfortunately, this means the documentation of many queens is lost to time. Their stories coming to us in broken pieces of pottery and papyrus, on ancient word of mouth from Greek and Rome, or from unidentified mummies that come and go as the sands blow thanks to the jealousy of mankind. Leader number 9 will be Khentihase the First. So, who was the first woman to rule Egypt? This will be the biggest debate of the video, as there are technically 3 qualifiers. First candidate is Khentihase the First. She was born circa 2550-2520 BC and died sometime between 2510 and 2490 BC. The remains of this female leader were undisturbed for 2 millennia within her necropolis until its excavation in the 1930s. And since its discovery at Giza, her tomb has intrigued historians and archaeologists alike. The mausoleum is as grand as other pyramids of her predecessors and includes a solar boat, a chapel, granaries, and a water tank. A small structure known as the washing tent of the female king had been built in front of her temple, and here the body was washed and ritually purified prior to being embalmed. Her mastaba is believed to have been the final royal tomb that was constructed at that necropolis, and many scholars believe that it was strongly connected to the pharaohs of the 4th and 5th dynasties. On its granite doorway, her formal title is construed to be the Mother of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, holding office as King of Upper and Lower Egypt. In support of the latter title is her image, which is altered to show her in a kingly pose, including the false beard, the royal uraeus cobra crown, and holding a scepter, one of the many adjustments and additions made up until the 6th century, implying that this pharaoh possibly had continued a role in religion and worship after her death. Khenti may have ruled as a regent for her presumed son, Sahur, possibly in conjunction with Ustarkaf, the founder of the 5th dynasty. However, despite the fact that she was apparently considered an ancestress of the 5th dynasty and was commemorated in the mortuary temple of Apsur at Kenikartes II, her name has never been found in a royal cartouche. Leader number 8 is Mernis. Among ancient Egypt's greatest female leaders was Queen Mernis, who had the overwhelming ambition to rule a country and stopped whoever never shared that sentiment. Her name means the beloved Neith, the daughter of King Diar, and beloved she seemed to be, until after she died, and then the men didn't have to respect her anymore, that is. Even if she wasn't the first woman to rule Egypt, she definitely seemed to be. But if historians want to debate endlessly, who am I to stop their fun? She definitely was the first woman to rule anything in known human history, because she was born about 3,000 years ago. Merneith stepped in as regent after her husband's death, as their son Den was too young to rule at the time. Karakuni, an Egyptologist, said that these women were often used as protectors. Men would put women in high positions to keep young male leaders safe and give them time to mature. When a man was ready to take over as pharaoh, the woman in charge would step down. But Bernice was Old Kingdom Egypt, and when she assumed this tutelage, it was in despite of what religious traditions of the first dynasty decreed, that only men were to rule. Despite that, Merneith stood rigidly by her son for a full decade, from 2939 to 2929 BC, until he became one of the most prominent kings of Old Kingdom Egypt. Despite the fact that there are few records of her name in any tombs, her accomplishments in life, she's still believed to have been a figure of great power and simultaneously respected and despised. Either way, she's one of those pharaohs that was buried alongside 50 live servants. Leader number 7 is Nikokris. The third and most mysterious candidate for the first female king of Egypt is recorded many centuries later in the work of the Egyptian historian Manetho. Her name is Nikokris, and she was believed to have lived around the 22nd century BC, which was towards the end of the 6th dynasty. Some have suggested that Nikokris was the last pharaoh of this dynasty. As Manetho tells us, she built the third pyramid and reigned for 12 years, but the whole third pyramid thing is an absolute disaster. If you know anything about ancient Egypt, there's just so much BS around the kings list and the dynasties. We don't know who made it, and every time we think we do, someone else shows up in history and has it attributed to them. So, it's up in the air. Herodotus also mentions Nikokris, but in the colorful context that she had killed hundreds to avenge the Egyptian king who had been slain by the people in a coup, and who happened to be her brother. The people had given the kingdom to Nikokris to rule after doing so. The story is that she had constructed an elaborate underground dining chamber under the guise of it being for her coronation, inviting all those she knew to be responsible for her brother's death, as well as anyone who knew of the coup plan but did nothing of it. This includes servants, concubines, officials, priests, the whole shebang. As the banquet progressed, Nikokris, surveying safely from a platform, had her servants open the floodgates and let the flow of the Nile River into the chamber through a concealed pipe, drowning all in attendance. To quote Herodotus, that is all the information I was given about Nikokris, except that afterwards she threw herself in a chamber full of ashes to avoid retribution. Leader number 6 is Sobekneferu. It's not until the end of the Middle Kingdom that we find for the first time 100% pure, clear evidence of a female king. So, her name was Sobekneferu, and there are about 5 variations of her name, all harder to say than the last. However, the name Sobekneferu means the beauties of Sobek, in reference to the crocodile god, one that the rulers of the 12th dynasty established a religious and economic center in Fayum IV, where crocodiles were nurtured and worshipped. Queen Sobekneferu rose to power after the death of her brother/husband Amenemhat IV, which made her the 8th ruler of Egypt's 12th dynasty, and she went on to rule for nearly 4 years. That was a lot of numbers in one sentence, so I hope you're keeping up. Though missing her head in many, the queen statues found in Fayum show that she appeared to combine masculine and feminine aspects of regal dress, similar to many other female rulers of Egypt. She is the last ruler prior to the New Kingdom to appear in the offering list found at Abydos and Saqqara, which does suggest some kind of posthumous verdict that separates her from the kings who followed her with equally short reigns. How Sobekneferu died or where she was buried remains a mystery. Some have suggested that her burial might be in one of the pyramids at Masgana, but this is very unlikely, as is Amenemhat's labyrinth or Herculapolis, both of which she contributed to. Thus, one of the most powerful women of the early world history remains a mystery. Leader number 5 is Cleopatra. Everyone knows Cleopatra. There's already been so much written about it, you could drown in it. Yet, we still know next to nothing about her. But thanks to a famous smear campaign against her by, everyone in ancient times, I can list off a few not so nice details about this queen to fit more into our repulsive theme. If you want to learn more about her life, maybe check out the recent Top 10 Filthy Secrets of Cleopatra That'll Make You Blush video on our channel Bumblebee. Maybe while you're at it, subscribe to The Hive if you want to see more like it. Born in 69 BCE, Cleopatra's 7th Tia Philopator was bred to be a ruler, having come from a long line of royal siblings having children together, which makes their family tree look a lot more like a family ladder when drawn on paper, just instead of like branching out roots. And apparently, sharing a bed with a cousin isn't enough, you had to share names too. About 90% of Cleopatra's family was either named Ptolemy or Cleopatra. Every now and then, a Bernice or an Arsenio was thrown in there to give us a break. I guess it would make interfamily relations a little bit less weird and more normalized if your dad, uncle, brother, half-brother, brother, and new husband/brother all have the same name. Maybe a different Cleopatra, who famously married 2 of her brothers and also killed at least one of them. The other one, she had somebody else do it for her. Leader number 4 is Amos. Amos was the principal wife of Pharaoh Thutmose I in the 18th dynasty and the mother of Hatshepsut, who went on to become one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. She had many titles: King's Great Wife, King's Sister, Hereditary Princess, Great of Praises, and Mistress of the 2 Lands. However, it appears she is a rare occurrence of a primary wife not being of royal blood, which would explain why her probable son, Prince Amenmones, was not mentioned in the Theban mortuary chapel of Wadmos, which attests her husband's secondary wife and her sons. The whereabouts of Amos's tomb and mummy remain unknown, likely one of the many lost to pillaging and weird Victorian unwrapping parties. However, Stela found in Edefu that once belonged to an official called Yuf remains a testament to her existence. He recorded that the Queen Amos appointed him as an assistant treasurer and entrusted him with the service to a statue of Her Majesty. Amos owes a lot of thanks to her daughter, Hatshepsut, however, for plastering her face everywhere. As you'll learn in the next segment, Hatshepsut dedicated herself as a demigod, and so put up many etchings and murals of her divine conception, the image of the god Amun approaching her mother, Amos, or some more compromising images of the two together. Good for Amos, catching a god's attention. Leader number 3 is Hatshepsut. So, from mother to daughter, let's talk about this train wreck who was also the most influential and long-ruling Egyptian queen and was known to be a great diplomat during her 22-year reign. She is also regarded as the first great woman in recorded history. Hatshepsut was only the second known woman to assume the throne as king of Upper and Lower Egypt after Queen Sobeknefu, whom was the model for this pharaoh as a queen and whom she based many of her decisions upon. Upon Thutmose II's death, the throne was passed to Thutmose III, and Hatshepsut, who was the aunt and stepmother, acted as regent until simply just taking the crown herself. Like pretty much every Egyptian queen short of Cleopatra, Hattie dressed in men's royal garb, wore a false beard, and created statues of herself with the pharaoh's headdress. During the 7th year of her reign, however, she went even further and asked to be depicted as a man, ordering to be referred to not as a queen, but as a king. Hattie surrounded herself with strong and loyal advisors, her favorite being the royal steward Senimut, who many believe was having an affair with the queen. The evidence for this claim is the fact that Hatshepsut allowed Senimut to place his name and image of himself behind one of the main doors of the Djeser Dessau, which is rare, and an unusual share of credit. That and plenty of graffiti made by peasants and workers depict the two in compromising positions. Not kidding, ancient R-rated graffiti. Anyway, Hattie's reign was peaceful, a time where many monuments were erected of her, of Amun, who she claimed was her lineage was based off of Bastet, maybe a few more of her, to be humble. However, after her death, her successor, who was possibly even her own stepson, attempted to erase all record of her, destroyed statues, burnt documents, attempted to remove her presence from Egypt. This effort only half works. While we don't know much as we wish we could, Hatshepsut is still remembered to this day. Leader number 2 is Nefertiti. This is the queen married to the cult guy who was so hated in Egypt that everyone agreed to ignore that he had ever happened. Unfortunately, it means this beauty had her name tarnished in the process, call it cancelled by association. That's why Taylor Swift broke up with the problematic singer guy Matty. I think the name alone is worth the breakup. Why are you in your mid-30s but still going by Matty? Nefertiti's name can translate to a beautiful woman has arrived, and that she had, from parents unknown. We haven't figured that part out. A life-size bust of the queen was found in 1912 and is her most famous image and depiction, and it shows she really was a stunner, to the extent it's believed that ancient Egyptians revered her as a fertility goddess embodied. However, other Egyptian art depicts Nefertiti in ways normally only pharaohs are shown. For instance, she's portrayed smiting enemies, such as on a ship, raising her right hand to kill female prisoners, a depiction often seen on male pharaohs. Additionally, the type of helmet-like crown Nefertiti is wearing in the bust is typically reserved for pharaohs or the goddess Tefnut or Hathor. One idea is that after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti's power and popularity was so great she was able to rule as pharaoh in her own right. Egyptian records mention a figure named Neferenfatuen, who ruled Egypt for a brief time. Like how actors took stage names, pharaohs actually took throne names, and it's speculated this was the throne name for Nefertiti. This means our girl was on the throne for 3 years, but as you know, after her reign, the Egyptian people tried to wash her away to the best of their abilities. Took Mahad, undid Akhenaten's religious reform, Amarna became abandoned, and images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti are destroyed. Leader number 1 is Aset. You may know her by her Grecian name, however, Isis. She was the queen mother of all gods. Her name quite literally translates to Queen of the Throne, which is reflected in her headdress, which is sometimes a literal throne. However, sometimes it takes on traits from Hathors or Muts to represent her assimilation with other women in the pantheon. While she seemingly started as a side figure to her husband Osiris, she was quickly transformed into the queen of the universe and an embodiment of cosmic order. By the Roman period, Aset was believed to control fate and linear existence itself. This is accredited to the story of Ra's secret name, wherein Aset is able to find out the true name of Ra, something no other god knows, and ultimately makes her his equal, if not more powerful than he. Aset was the sister and wife of the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld. It is said that she and Osiris were in love with each other even within the womb. As he was king of Egypt, Isis was queen, and one who supported her husband and taught the women of Egypt to weave, bake, and brew beer. Set was always angry with this relation, as Isis reigned over the land of Egypt in the wake of the traveling Osiris instead of Set. She was stronger, and he regarded this with jealous eyes, as well as the good works of his brother, for his heart was full of evil and he loved warfare better than peace. The queens frustrated his wicked designs, so he sought in vain to prevail in battle against her and plotted to overcome Osiris by Gal. This is how the famous story of Osiris' death, Horus's birth, and the grieving of Set prevails as one of Egypt's most famous stories. Set tricks Osiris into the coffin, which he tosses in the Nile. The grieving of Set refused to accept this and search far and wide as a fugitive, birthing their son Horus on the journey. When she finds the coffin, she returns it to Egypt. Unfortunately, Set finds it hidden again and dismembers Osiris, scattering the pieces. Isis still refuses to relent. She finds the pieces and entombs them. Anubis, with the assistance of Thoth and Horus, united the severed portions of the body of Osiris, which they wrapped in linen bandage. Thus the origin of the mummy form of the god. Osiris then became the judge and king of the dead, residing in the underworld, as Isis remained with Horus on the above.